Hey, good Wednesday morning. Yeah, Wednesday. And it's January 6th, 2021. You know what that means? It's Epiphany. Yeah, in the church, it's Epiphany. And what does that mean? Well, we recognize the day that the wise men found Jesus. Yeah. And I'm going to talk about that today because, we always equate that during Christmas, right? I mean, most of you watching this, you probably put up a nativity scene and you probably had your shepherds and your wise men and you had Mary and Joseph, you had angels, you had the animals but it's not till later that the wise men come. Remember, it's the shepherds who actually go to the manger and found Jesus the way that the angel said that they would. And so I'm going to talk about the wise men, okay? So Matthew chapter 2, if you got a Bible, you can follow along. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem, and they asked, "Where was the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose, and we've come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. Then he called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law. He asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem, in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time that the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, Go and search. Search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." And after they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star that they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. So the star was leading them. And most scholars believe that these wise men traveled from a great distance. And, today's Epiphany, and I said that. And, starting Christmas Day, we have the 12 days of Christmas. And it ends today when we recognize the visit of the Magi. And so the star was leading them. Most folks, well, not most, but many scholars believe that these wise men probably traveled from Babylon. And when you go back to the book of Daniel, and I'll go back and read some of that to you as well, because when Nebuchadnezzar took these slaves, these servants from Israel, these were people of nobility. These were people who could easily learn. And it sounded like these were chosen for purpose. But what Nebuchadnezzar didn't count on was these folks that he brought to Babylon. They were not going to defile themselves. They were going to stand firm, following and worshiping their God and following the dietary customs of their God. So a lot of scholars believe that these wise men that traveled held on to their faith and was watching for the sign, and they knew exactly when to follow. And when they followed, it was probably a year or two before Jesus was even born, because they had to travel a great distance. And it's not just 3. That's the number of gifts that are given and mentioned in the Bible. But the majority of folks, when they traveled in those days, they traveled in a large caravan. And it wasn't just 3 wise men or 3 magi, as your translation will tell you. There was more than that. But there are 3 gifts that are mentioned. And that's where people confuse we 3 kings. And because they equate the number of gifts with the number of wise men. And so we sing that song, and Yeah, we really don't know how many wise men or how many magi or how many kings, however you want to refer to them, but how many of them actually showed up. But the star led them to where Jesus was. And that's where I left off here in Matthew. It says that the star stopped over the place where the child was. In verse 10 of Matthew chapter 2, it says, when they saw the star, they were overjoyed. Yeah, because it stopped, right? On coming to the house, you hear that? On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and they worshiped him. So these wise men, when they show up, Jesus and Mary and Joseph are no longer in the manger. They're in the house. And these wise men bowed down and worship, and they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, of frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. And so, again, the caravan had to go back to where they came from. But gold, frankincense, and myrrh are the three gifts that are mentioned. You can Google them and you can see for yourself what they stand for. There are so many interpretations. But the important thing is, is that these wise men, these magi, they never gave up. And as I said, some scholars say that they probably came when you look at the book of Daniel. In Daniel chapter 1, I'm going to share this with you. The king, I'm going to look at verse 3. The king ordered the chief of his court officials to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the ones of nobility. Yeah. So young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. Among those who were chosen, and they give a list from Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. Chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach. To Mishael, Meshach. And to Azariah, Abednego. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, I'm afraid that of my lord, the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? And the king would then have my head because of you. But Daniel made this agreement with this official that you let me follow my decrees, you let me follow my dietary laws, you let me worship my God. And if I look any different than the others, then I'll eat what the king sends. I mean, that's basically what he says. And what happens is Daniel's appearance is actually a lot sharper, more healthier than the others. And, when Daniel makes this agreement with Nebuchadnezzar, and throughout the book of Daniel, you have these Israelites who will not bow down to their gods of Babylon. They will not worship any other god. They will not, they're thrown into the lion's den. They're thrown into the fiery furnace because they would not deny their God and their faith. And scholars believe that these wise men probably came from Babylon and probably ancestors of those Israelites who were taken by Nebuchadnezzar and his army. And we don't know. That's just scholars who study and look at all the possibilities. But on this day, this Wednesday, the gifts that were given to Jesus, the gifts that were given to Mary and Joseph, the gifts that were offered, and the way they worshiped him. I often think about what gifts do we give? I mean, do we give gifts to Christ? Do we give Christ our heart? Do we show Christ our love? And do we show that love to our neighbors? On this particular day, I think it's important for all of us to think about what it is that Christ did, not only for the wise men, but what did Christ do for us? And what does Christ offer us? It's not a political leader that's going to save our world. It's not a religious leader like me and some of you watching this that's going to save our world. It's Jesus. And these wise men, these scholars, they were watching and waiting all those years from generation to generation, passing down the word to their children and then to their children. And it was at that point when that generation, when those wise men saw the signs, they began their journey. They went through the wilderness. And when they found the child in that house, they fell on their knees and worshiped him, giving him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And I hope and pray that on this day, this Epiphany, that you realize the gifts that God sent to all of us. For God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but shall have everlasting life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him will be saved. Hey, this is Pastor Bill from St. Luke's United Methodist Church, Harrisville, West Virginia, Ritchie County, West Virginia. Wherever you are, I hope you're happy, I hope you're healthy, and I hope you're safe. Have a great day, and God bless each and every one.